Testing, testing, testing.
But all other 14 are our core, show up pretty regularly. So, yeah. And they all have traveled together except one. One has for she just finished sixth grade. Oh, I know, I got her message. But she has sister boys, so she should be just fine. It will. Tennis shoes?
That's about all I can wait.
When did she come back? But if you
Good morning, everyone. Happy Pentecost. Happy Pentecost. There we go. As we gather and come in this morning, I encourage you to begin talking about the question that is on your table. Share about a meaningful experience in your life that involves music in some way. It can be sacred or secular, whatever you wish. We will get started just about 5 after 9.
You're all supposed to pick up the key and anyway, I wanted to let you know that there was no loss on there. I don't know where the lock is. I know what the lock was because I'm about to say the same lock.
Yeah, if I I know you were. Of course, this is the first run. But no worries. Yeah, I mean we're just working on bugs right now. Plus I got cameras everywhere. Understand? We're getting cleaned up. A little bit finessed. That's great. Yeah, I wish we were here for yours. I'm glad that this can be recorded. Yeah.
Setting up.
All right.
Good.
So thank you.
Where the sound itself kind of goes up into the roof. It's really like how that works.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Pentecost again, for those of you who just came in. We hope that you have enjoyed sharing a little bit about the question on the tables each week when we come in for these I Am Calvary forums. There is a question of the day on the table, and that offers us the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better as we get to know one of our congregation members better as they come to share. And the idea is that the question relates somehow to a piece of the story that they will be sharing. That certainly is the case today with Rick Breitenbecher. Just a note, before I introduce Rick, I want you all to know that Bill Warren is over here videoing and webcasting these forums. We realized over the last couple of years, we wished we had been recording these. So this is your notification that you are on a webcast. If you do not consent to be webcast, I'm sure Bill could show you where you could sit to be out of the frame. The narthex, right? But we thank you, Bill, for that ministry, and I guess that's just a note for you all, too, going forward. If you're not able to be here in person, you'll be able to catch up and hear people's stories. A word about next week's speaker first is Damon Scalfaro. He is my husband, so I think he's very interesting, but he has quite a life story to tell, and he'll be here sharing. And then following Damon, our lineup for the rest of the summer includes Walter Rowell, Debbie Honecker, Diana McGahan, Mick Davey, Sandrine Haas, Kim Lenz, Geraldine Saunders-Cook, Margie Janelle, Del Walker, our youth, who will be reporting about camp, and then Ray Schramm. So it's a wonderful lineup. And today we are so pleased to have Rick with us. Rick grew up in suburban Detroit and spent his first 27 years living in that region. He was active for many years in his family church, the Grosse Pointe Memorial Presbyterian Church. Starting with Sunday school and then the high school youth group, he went on to serve in the high school choir and later the chancel choir, learning to play the church's carillon, serving on the worship council, learning skills on the pipe organ, as well as working as sexton during his years in college for extra school money. After earning a degree in business administration from Wayne State University in Detroit, Rick spent a few more years in town before heading to the West Coast, moving to Orange County, California in 2010. And for the next 2 decades, he worked in the wireless telecom industry, a field where he is still employed today. Rick and his partner Christopher decided to move from California to Denver in 2010, where Christopher and his family grew up. Rick has been active at Calvary for the past 4 years, singing in the bass section in the Calvary choir, assisting with service music as needed at the organ. And I'll just say that Rick was a huge help for us, especially during our interim time, and he also served on the music search committee, so we thank you, Rick. And also he currently serves on council. He's going to speak with us about his journey to discover faith in Christ and how his faith has helped him through journeying with the substance abuse addiction of a loved one, and also the role that music plays in worship. Will you join me in welcoming Rick?
Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you this morning. And happy Pentecost. As Ann said in my bio, I grew up in Michigan. I was born in California, but never lived in California until I was in my late 20s. And that was because my mother and father lived in San Diego at the time, which is where I was born in 1963. I don't remember any of that era, obviously, because I was just very, very young. So when I came back to California, it was all new to me. But I did grow up in Michigan and had a very unremarkable childhood. Just spent a lot of time with my grandparents, was very, very close with them. My grandparents were the first folks to really take me to church every Sunday morning, because my father worked at the time on Sundays, and my mother didn't really attend church, and I used to like to spend Saturday nights at my grandma and grandpa's house because we got popcorn and snacks and ice cream and watched TV. So they liked to attend the church. They would take me to Sunday school. So I had this really nice kind of comfortable family, feel with attending my church. My grandma and grandpa would then take us out to breakfast afterwards, and it was just a really nice recollection that I still enjoy today. As I got older, continued on with Sunday school, but then it was time for high school, and the church youth group was called Tuxis, Tuxis. That stands for Together Under Christ in Service. And when I joined that group, that youth group, it was in the late 1970s. I was a freshman in high school, and it was really at that time that I think I first tried to get in touch with my faith. And the reason for that is I had just moved to a different side of town, and I didn't know a lot of the kids at that high school. So in joining the youth group at the church, I met all these great kids. And on our first retreat, I remember very clearly, we all sat around and just really talked about, what does Jesus mean to you? And it was something I'd never thought about. Yeah, I had gone to high school or to Sunday school for all those years before that, but when you're little, you don't really think about what God means to you and what Christ means to you. It was during that first retreat that I started to really think about what does Jesus mean in my life, and what does faith mean. So that, to me, I think was the start of what I guess I would call a journey in faith in God and faith in Christ, and really knowing what it means to have deep meditation and to start thinking about what it means to pray and what the power of God is all about. And that would come to serve me at a very important time, which I'll tell you about in just a moment or two. But it was during the high school period where I started to develop faith, and I made a lot of really good friends, a number of them that I have to this day. When I continued through high school, I attended college. Then I still lived at home. I went to an urban university in downtown Detroit called Wayne State, and I was able to still live at home and go to school for my 4 years. I got my degree in 1986, and it was right around that time when I got in touch with my biological father, who I had never actually known. He and my mother divorced when I was 3 years old. And my mother remarried to my stepfather when I was 5 years old. And I grew up my whole life with my stepfather. So in the meantime, my biological father, who had not really been able to contact me until I was an adult, he reached out to me when I was 18, and he lived in California. He lived in Orange County, California. So around that time, I started going out to California to visit. And I was like, wow, this is the place to be. The sun shines all the time. You've got beaches. You've got everybody working. And Detroit was dreary and cold and cloudy and seemingly in a permanent state of recession. So here I am getting my college degree and thinking, well, where do I want to go? Do I want to stay here in Detroit, or do I want to go to California? Well, as it was, I did wind up staying in Detroit for another 4 years after I got my degree, and started putting down some roots over and above just my family and friends. I started thinking, well, long-term planning, buy a house here in Michigan, and kind of just keep my existence going. And it occurred to me in about 1989, it's now or never. You either stay in Detroit, or if you really want to go to California, you got to pull the trigger right now and make a clean break. So that's what I did. And that was one of the hardest things ever to share with my mother, because the circumstances for me moving to California was that I would be going to work for my father and his business partner. They had set up a small entrepreneurial company which worked with cell phones. And those were really pretty new still in 1990. Some people had phones in their cars, but mostly no one had those big handheld phones. These are very small now, but if you remember, the Motorola Business Classic was a big brick, and it weighed about 4 pounds. We dealt with those phones. So I had to explain to my mother that my love for my family was in no way diminished by my choice to move, but I told her I really need to spread my own wings now, that it's time to go and get out from under their wing. And so I made that move, and it was the best decision probably that I've ever made, because so many wonderful things happened over the next 20 years. After moving to California, I was, of course, without a church, and I had decided that being kind of a church musician, singing in choir, and a fan of the pipe organ, that I should go to the best place I could find in Orange County that had a choir and a really wonderful pipe organ, and that was the Crystal Cathedral. And that, for those of you who know, it is a enormous glass church that was built for the ministry of Robert Schuller, who has since passed away. I sang in their choir for 18 years after joining there. I played the Carillon, which was newly built, newly added to that campus right at around the time I moved to California. So I had a really great entree into this new church. And the greatest thing about joining a choir, and it's true of this choir here at Calvary, it was true of the Crystal Cathedral, I think it's true of any choir, whether it's in a church or not, is you meet some great people. You meet friends singing in a choir that you will have for the rest of your life. And when I hear people talk about, well, I moved to a new place, or I'm really lonely, I don't have much to do, I feel like saying, join a choir. You're gonna have so much fun. Even if you're not a really good music reader, you're gonna have fun, but you're gonna meet people that you're gonna do things outside of that group with, and you're going to just get so much fulfillment out of that. And I've found that to be true of Calvary Choir as well. I've met some wonderful people who I spend time with outside of here, and we have a ball. So, singing in the Crystal Cathedral Choir for a number of years, we performed some incredible things. That church had the means and the resources for a pipe organ, as I described, that was probably comparable with only a few other instruments worldwide. We also had an orchestra every Sunday morning. And when you sang an anthem, you had a 19,000 pipe organ, you had a full symphony orchestra, and you had about a 60-voice choir. And you could raise the rafters with singing an anthem with that kind of music going. And every week was like attending a concert almost. And we had a wonderful, wonderful experience singing in front of many different guests who came there to speak with Robert Schuller or be interviewed in the service. It was just an incredible experience. Throughout all that, though, I had been in California about 9 years at this time. I didn't have anyone. I had not dated anyone. And I felt very lonely, even though I was having a wonderful time living in the Sunshine State. When I finally said to myself, you know, Lord, I'm prepared to just be alone now for the rest of my life. I'm 36 years old. Don't have anyone, don't seem to have any prospects. And it was right then that someone literally fell from the sky. And we started dating, we started going out. His name is Christopher. And we have actually been together to this day. And that was in 1999. We just celebrated our 20-year anniversary. So Christopher and I, thank you. Christopher and I bought a place together. We moved in only after knowing each other for about 5 months and had this really nice little existence carved out for ourselves. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, we're both working good jobs. We have a nice condo and a beautiful setting. Everything's peachy. And I thought, it's going too well. I wonder if the other shoe's going to drop because everything is just lovely right now. And sure enough, it did. Christopher had always been very, very involved in athletics all his life. And as he's the same age as me, so at age 36, 37, 38, he found himself starting to lose some of his athletic ability, including having to have a hip replaced, having some other physical issues, and really became very depressed about that because he had been a jock all his life, and it was occurring to him that he's getting older now. And even though he had found someone in me to spend the rest of his life with, it was still something he was having a very hard time accepting, was the fact that he just wasn't going to be able to play so many sports. And he kind of fast forwarded himself into a place where he just wasn't able to do anything. And what that was, and I didn't know it at the time, was just some very deep-seated depression coming into his mind. I had no idea how to recognize that, and certainly didn't know what to do about it. Well, the depression actually led to an experimentation with crystal meth. Christopher had never done any drugs in his life. He had never smoked a cigarette. He hated drinking, never used marijuana, never done anything because he was an athlete. Well, he decided to try crystal meth against my wishes. I remember talking about it. And from the first night he did that, he was addicted to it. And that didn't stop for the next 5 years. And that's where the faith role came in, because I honestly did not know how to handle this. After a few years of me not telling anyone, family or friends, one of Christopher's best friends came to me and said, he's either dying of a terrible disease or he's on drugs. Which is it? And I finally had to just open up and kind of open the floodgates and say, look, he's been addicted for the last 2 years to this drug, and I don't know what to do about it. And Christopher's friend started to help me through this. We had an intervention. We got him to consent to go to rehab. Unfortunately, that failed. He was clean for a little while after rehab. And I say this knowing some of you have probably had some experience with a friend or a loved one or a child, parent, who may have been addicted to something like drugs or alcohol, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about right now. I didn't know what to do. In the intervention, one of the ultimatums I had to state was either you have to stop using, or else we cannot continue to live together. So it did come to that. We had to sell our place. We had to live separately. That lasted for 2.5 years. I bridge that period of time when I talk about how long he and I have been together, because even though we lived under 2 separate roofs, I couldn't just abandon him. I couldn't just let him go because he was really in trouble. All of our friends said, Rick, you got to make a fresh start. You've got this person, they're done with. And I just wasn't in that state of mind. I said, I really don't want to let go. He needs my help. So we still did things together. I still helped take care of him. He tried rehab a second time. That failed too. I couldn't manage this. I couldn't be working full time and try to help this person get himself better. And God bless his parents. What they told me finally was, they said, if he will consent to it, we will take him back here in Denver. We got to get him out of Southern California. There's too many triggers. There's too much of a lifestyle that embraces party drugs. He can't be there any longer. I said, if you'll take him back, let me see if I can get him to consent to that. And at first he said, no, can't do it, won't do it. After about a week of thinking about it, he's like, I think that's going to be the only thing that will save me. And it was at this time when, through all of the prayer, through all of the meditation I had had up till then, I still didn't really know what to do. And this was the one time when I really felt God speaking to me. And it occurred to me, I had never asked God all of this time, what can I do? All of my prayers had been, please make Christopher better. Please give him the strength to get off of drugs. Please help us. I never said, God, what can I do? And he was at the point where he couldn't even get out of bed in the morning anymore without using some of that drug, just to get him to a place where he could function in the morning. He had long since lost his job. And when I prayed to God, God, what can I do? Please, please tell me. That was the one time when I felt there was a spark of maybe divine something inside of me. And it was very simple, the response that I felt I received. It was just simply be there for him. And I thought, well, that's so simple. Haven't I been here? But that was really what was able to get us over this hump. I had to be there for him even more than I already had been. That included helping convince him to move back to Denver. I still lived in Orange County. Christopher came back here to Denver and still continued to use drugs when he was living with his parents. So we weren't out of the woods yet. It was at that time when they had decided to get 2 little puppy dogs from a litter. And the bonding and the love that people can share with their pets, that was the one thing that started to help him finally get a grip on his life. I wasn't even here for that. I was still back in California. I had come out on a couple of visits and I met the dogs, and I could see that they were having what looked like a good impact on him. And all the while, just still praying, still keeping my faith that this would have a happy ending. And ultimately, I was able to convince my employer to let me move to Denver. They had said no many, many times over the years because we had talked about moving to Denver even before he was using crystal meth. And the answer was always no. I had to lay it out on the line for our vice president of finance to say, this is why I want to move there. I have a partner who's in a lot of trouble and needs me, and please let me go and do my job from our Denver office. Finally, the answer was yes. So I was able to move here to Denver, and that was 9 years ago. And the novelty that I felt after getting here has really not worn off to this day. I have a very positive vibe about this city, and it feels good to live here. And this was the city that the circumstances allowed Christopher to get better. But as far as my faith goes, when I stop and think about, again, all of the prayer and just the wondering what to do, it was such a confusing and scary, scary time. The statistics show for people who are addicted to something like crystal meth, only about 5% of people can get off of it who are on it. Christopher is one of the rare exceptions. He has been clean for 9 years. He's had no drugs. What led us to this point, there were so many factors. I remember once being in the Crystal Cathedral one Sunday morning, and I had again, I use this term, I think it's trite sometimes when I hear people say I had a vision. And I don't know if this was a vision that I had, but what it was is I had suddenly an image of Jesus taking Christopher by the hand, and they were walking away, and I thought, he's going to die if he doesn't get better. And that's when I really had to turn to God and say, please tell me what to do. And the response, just be there. So I've been here with him now for 9 years, and we have a nice home set up for ourselves. And as I say, he is clean, he is better. That led me here to Calvary, ultimately. When I first came to Denver, I sang with a small music group that was based downtown, and Kevin Podwarski was part of that group. This is in 2010. And I didn't know anyone here in Denver in the church music circles. I met Kevin, and he's like, yeah, I'm director of music and choir director over at Calvary. Why don't you come sing with us sometime? I said, oh, that'd be awesome. Well, 5 years went by and I didn't do it. I would see Kevin from time to time, and our paths would cross. But ultimately, after taking a bit of a 5-year hiatus from all things church music related, I decided it was time to come back, and that was 4 years ago, and I've been here ever since. When I moved here and I stopped singing in a traditional church choir, it occurred to me that I had been in church choirs since 1978 until 2000. That was 32 years of either singing in church, working in church, playing a musical instrument in church, and I decided that I really did need a little bit of a break. And so I enjoyed my Sunday mornings at home. But again, after having met Kevin and thinking about the time I think is right to get back into a church family, I decided to come here to Calvary. And I've been very, very happy here ever since. The message of this church, that it's open to all and closed to none, obviously is very important to me, being a gay person. That to me makes a very big difference in how I feel about coming here and how I feel about being a member of this community. Ever since I joined this church, even before I joined, just starting to come here, from the time I started to come here, I felt very welcomed by everyone in this congregation. And that has made a very big difference to me. I feel like this is my church home. I feel that this is somewhere that I would like to stay and worship. And that's also led Christopher and I to a decision to be married in this church in December of this year. So we're going to be formally partnered after 20 years. We thought this might be a good time. I read a lot of social media, whether it's Facebook or whatever. I think it's very easy for people to get jaded over worship and maybe even Christianity because of the different voices that we hear so loud and clear through social media. And a lot of it's just very, very negative. And it's easy for me to become upset when I see people who profess to be Christians speaking just a blatantly non-Christian philosophy. And that's why this church keeps me centered and keeps me grounded. I've always worshiped through music. Music is what really connects me with the Spirit. And not so much through the spoken word, but since I've joined this church, the spoken word has taken on the same importance to me as music has. And I feel our clergy always ties the spoken word to what's happening in present day. And therefore, when I read some of this stuff or see some of this stuff in the media, I'm like, that's not how it is. That's not how it is for us in this family. This family is different. This church is different. And thank God for this church. So again, I just want to wrap up by saying thank you so much for welcoming me into your congregation and into your community, because it means a great, great deal to me. This church is probably the most important connection I have here in Denver outside of my family with Christopher, my in-laws. I think that being here at Calvary has made all the difference for me, and I'm very happy to be here, and I feel very loved and welcomed. So thank you. Any questions?
Questions?
They're mutts. They're just mutts. And the interesting thing about them, Anne has seen them, whenever someone sees our dogs, they look completely different. And they were in the same litter. And so what we learned through talking with a lot of people is apparently in the canine world, there can be a litter that actually had two fathers. Because some of the dogs are like little poodles. The other ones have completely different type of fur. But the two of them are brothers. They're like this. And as I've always said, these are the two creatures that helped my partner out of his trouble. That was the catalyst. And God bless those dogs.
It's nice to meet you, Rick. Manager hearing you speak. So, feeling, obviously you grew up in a time where you would have felt ostracized and everything. You came out and said anything about like your own personal, like, you could say beliefs, I guess, but like like how you were as a person. You know, something as simple as that, you know, glass ceiling as irrelevant as eye color, something just stupid. So, associating wherever you came from with a religion, or rather with the teachings of a religion, what made you find a place where, in your mind, you were ready to settle down and sit with, I guess, aligning yourself with a name which, in some places, they wouldn't consider you a true Christian. Instead of just following the teachings of Jesus and doing that, you sat down and you're like, I will take the name on me, I will bear the name of a Christian. And you decided to do that. What made you get to a point in your life where you decided to settle down with that aspect?
That part for me never seemed to be really in conflict. People that, you hear saying, well, if you're a gay person, you must not be a follower of Christ, or you must not believe in the Bible or something. Again, that never for me felt like a conflict. I always felt inside like my relationship with God, my relationship with Jesus is my own. And I will read the scriptures, and what those mean to me is just, it's something where I feel very, very comfortable in my relationship with Christ. I just don't feel that conflict needs to be there. I think that conflict can be considered man-made in some respects. Not to say that it's always easy. I mean, in high school, I didn't really understand these things. I didn't know how to respond to, well, you're Christian, you're in this church, and a lot of people condemn the way you are. And I didn't even fully understand what was happening with me at the time in terms of the gay sexuality part of it. That had not even really become a factor yet. But I do remember at the time I was very quiet about my faith. It wasn't something that I would be like, hey everyone, to my friends outside of my church group. I just kept a very low profile period in high school because kids can be really mean. And there certainly was a lot of bullying back then, even though we didn't have cell phones and social media to bully people with. They had their words, and those were very hurtful. So I just did my best at the time to keep quiet. But really, in terms of just a walk in faith, I think that how I've prayed all my life and just how I've tried to come to understand Jesus, it's a very deep-centered satisfaction where I don't feel any conflict with how society might view certain things about me. To me, that it just doesn't matter.
Talk about professionally, what you do with telecommunications.
Well, I work for Verizon Wireless, and I came to work for that company before it was Verizon Wireless, because Verizon didn't start until 2000. So I had gotten my degree in business admin and came out to California to work with my dad and his business partner. So that was sort of my first experience with the wireless industry. And it has always been exciting to me to work in that technology. I fell into it. I just fell into it by going to California, because when you grow up in Detroit, everyone, their dad works for something that's connected to the auto industry. Yeah, And so growing up in the 70s and the 80s, It was like, well, of course you'll go and try to get a job at General Motors or Ford. Well, you get your college degree in 1986, and guess what? All those companies are laying off white-collar employees by the tens of thousands at the time. And how are you supposed to get a job in that industry or any other industry? Because all of those white-collar executives are now flooding the job market. All the banks, all the accounting firms, all the ad firms. Anything having to do with any business in Detroit, there were waiting lists for people to apply. And that's why I said, this is not going to work. And when I went to California on one of those trips before I moved there to visit my father, I brought my resume with me. And I just happened to send it out to a couple placement agencies, and they're like, we will hire you today. We've got something today. And I was like, wow. So it made that decision to move for that reason professionally a little easier. But I work in finance for Verizon. And we actually have a new business now, a business unit that I work for specifically called Visible. And Visible is a new company, kind of a new platform. It's a prepaid wireless service. And so I'm still employed by Verizon, but now for one of their subsidiaries.
Could you talk a little bit about your music development? When you took lessons, I assume you did. Did it come easy? Was it come hard? How did you happen to get over to that funny instrument with the foot pedals and all of that?
Which one, the organ or the carillon? They're both funny, yeah. When I was probably about 7 years old, I noticed I had an aptitude for playing the piano. I could sound out basic songs just on my own at a keyboard, including the chords. And my parents were like, well, you seem to be musical more so than them. And my grandmother bought me one of these little, it's called a chord organ because there's chords that you just press a button, it plays the whole chord for you, and then the other finger can play the melody. She bought me one of those when I was about 7 years old. And so I started playing that, and then we got a piano shortly after that. And then around that time, I was starting to feel more connection to that church I had talked about. Our brand new organist and director of music was giving little scholarships to learn how to play the bells. That's the carillon. We had a 50-some bell carillon at that church. Carillon is just chromatically tuned bells. There's one at Denver University. And these aren't just bells, these are bells the circumference of this table right here. The whole instrument weighs about 36,000 tons. So, I beg your pardon, 36 tons. I forget the weight, but it's huge. And so I started learning to play the carillon just based on my experience with piano, learning piano. Now, people, some of you have heard me play the organ here. I really love playing hymns. That's just my favorite thing to play. Sometimes I come into here and I just play hymns when there's nobody listening. I have not formally had organ lessons. I have studied the organ and organ technique from afar, but never in a professional setting. I have, however, had lots of music lessons on piano and sung in choirs for a very long time and so forth. So I understand a lot about the theory of how to play the organ and what stops to use in certain combinations and whatnot. But anything you've heard me play has just been from my interest in the instrument and just enjoying playing it. I don't know a lot of organ literature. In fact, I know almost no organ literature, and by that I mean I can't sit down and play a piece by Bach, who's one of the most prolific organ composers. The pieces that I will play here at Calvary, what I like to do is I like to take a theme that's maybe being sung about or spoken about that day and apply that to a musical setting and do an improvised arrangement on that, using all the wonderful resources that organ has. There's so many tonal colors that an organist can use. And that's really what I enjoy doing, say, for a prelude or for a postlude, is just taking a well-known musical theme that fits with that day's service and presenting an improvised arrangement of that. Yeah.
When did you start at the Crystal Cathedral?
Let me see, 1992.
Oh, okay. Then I didn't hear you sing.
Were you out there?
I went there one time. My dad was a huge Robert Schuller.
Oh, okay.
I listened to him on TV. You probably heard me sing on TV.
Could have, yeah.
What was it like at the Crystal Cathedral? David talked a couple weeks ago about having to leave the job he liked because he couldn't admit to being gay. How welcoming and affirming was the
It was very welcoming and affirming. Now, that didn't necessarily come from the top. The Schulers, Dr. and Mrs., were sort of old school Iowa farm family people. They were very easygoing. They were very comfortable with, there were a lot of gay people in our choir. Our organist, Fred Swan, who some people may recognize that name, he was gay. They were like okay with that. It just wasn't something I guess we talked about a lot. I mean, now, 20 some years later, I think a lot of churches are just more comfortable in saying, well, we have a lot of gay people here singing, working, volunteering, whatever. Even in the 90s, it wasn't quite that comfortable. But the Schulers were wonderful people and very, very supportive of everything. What I did find interesting, however, was as they became older and were stepping back from their roles of leadership in that church, their kids were being put into positions of leadership, and we found them to be a lot less tolerant, to the point of almost hostility at times. And that was around the time I was leaving to come here. And I thought to myself that the time has come to end that relationship with that church after 18 years of so much fulfillment, musically and otherwise, that it brought me. I thought, I'm glad I'm leaving. I'm glad I'm moving to Denver, because even if I were staying in California, I probably wouldn't keep going here, is how I felt at the time. The church, the ministry and property was sold a short time after that. It went bankrupt.
because you left.
Because I left, I know. I was always treated personally very nicely, but there were strong undercurrents of, I guess, negativity, you could say, that were coming out as other people were taking some of the reins of power, if you will, within that ministry, and it was unfortunate. Anyone else? Okay, well, again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick, for sharing so openly and vulnerably with us. I think your journey speaks to many in this room who have had similar experiences with addiction, and it's something we don't talk about openly, and I know it took a lot of courage, so thank you. Will you all join me as we pray for Rick and for Christopher? Gracious God, we are so grateful for your beloved son, Rick. We thank you for the ways that your spirit has moved in his life, from his youth as a young child into his youth group, into young adulthood, and now into the man he is today. We thank you for the seeds of faith that have been planted from his grandmother's interest in music and getting him that first organ, and his parents' support, and those friends from that high school youth group, discovering his biological father and the opportunity to move to California, the ministry of Crystal Cathedral and how that nourished his spirit musically and how that encouraged his faith. We're so grateful that he found his love, Christopher, and Lord, for the journey they have been on and are still on. We know that you are walking with them. We thank you for really the miracle that Christopher is here with us today. We thank you for the healing that he has found in Denver through his family and the dogs and through Rick. We pray that you would continue to nurture Rick and Christopher's relationship, that you would continue to lead them. We thank you for the gifts that you've given Rick and how he is sharing those with our community of faith. And we thank you, O God, for the strength of Rick's faith and for his beautiful ability to articulate the meaning of prayer and faith in his life. may we all, O God, ask in our own prayers what we can do to support those we love, what we can do to be your hands and feet in the world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Is our cake? What is that? Oh, Mary is coming quickly for an announcement. And then we have a cake for Pentecost, which it's back there. Wonderful. Morgan, if you like the candles in the prayer.
I just want to mention that today, one of the special things that's happening as a part of Pentecost is recognizing our VIPs, our very inspiring people. And we have 2 here now. Most are coming for worship and staying for lunch, so it's, kind of a long morning. But Edith Berglund is here now, and Dina Stanton is here. So for each of the VIPs, in addition to a recognition later, they will be wearing a button just to identify very inspiring person. But we all know that they are. So I'm going to give those buttons to them, and then I'm going to, Morgan, you've got the candle to light the cake. Great.
Edith is coming to impromptu play Happy Birthday for us in a moment, though we will wait for the candles. This is a cake to celebrate the birthday of the church, Pentecost. Over 2,000 years ago and still today, the Spirit is alive and moving. So as we sing, when we get to the place where you normally put your name, let's just say happy birthday to the church, because we're really celebrating not Calvary's birthday, but the birthday of the church with a big C. Does that sound good? I'm waiting. Let's see. Larry's head. How many years of candles do we have, Morgan? No, I mean, like, hopefully we don't have 2,000 years of candles. I understand. How many candles are there, Larry? 12 candles. 12 candles. The 12 apostles. There you go. Do we have a few volunteers to blow out the candles when we get to the appropriate time? Angela, do you want the kids to try to blow the candles out? Great. Edith, if you will lead us. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to the church. Happy birthday to you. And